The question of what is true, what truth is one that ultimately leads or usually leads to a discussion of what's called in philosophy relativism. And in particular, for our case, there's a view, ethical relativism, that sometimes people think leads to ethical skepticism, and we'll see why. But let's just worry about what it is that we're talking. What is this relativism that we're talking about? And the first thing is I want you to consider a pair of statements. The earth isn't flat, and the earth is flat. Well, I mean, what you might say is these are supposed to be statements of fact, factual statements. And we know the first one is a true factual statement, and the second one is a false factual statement. At least most of us agree on that one. And sometimes that's contrasted with a different example, one that's captured in the following two sentences. That is, the best flavor of ice cream is vanilla, and 2B, the best flavor of ice cream is chocolate. And you might say these are statements about taste or aesthetic judgments, we sometimes say. Sounds very fancy. We learned about what aesthetics is. It has to do with the philosophical study of beauty. Is there an objective standard? But the point that's being made about these two sentences is when it comes to the best flavor of ice cream, that's dependent, or that is relative to a particular person. That is, one person who will judge that vanilla is best, the other one will judge chocolate is best, and then there's a third, somebody might come up with a different one. Okay, let's look at another set of statements. Think about Smith believes that the earth is flat, and Jones believes that the earth isn't flat. And these are what we might call psychological statements. Statements about people's state of mind. The first one telling us that Smith's state of mind is that the earth is flat. He believes that the earth is flat. That's a state. And Jones has a belief that contradicts Smith's belief. That is, Jones believes that the earth isn't flat. But notice both of these statements are true. That is, Smith does believe that the earth is flat. Jones does believe that the earth is not flat. And now we want to consider two statements. It's wrong to use violence in any circumstances. Moral statement, we now have wrong. And it's right to use violence to protect one from bodily harm. Now here we have ethical statements or moral statements, statements about morality. And what's kind of interesting when we start looking at these pairs of statements, when we look at the first two, the factual statements, and when we ask about whether they are true or not or false, we say they are objectively true. Now with the second pair of statements, and sometimes people say in the third pair of statements, they say the truth of these statements is relative, right? The person who likes vanilla best, that statement is kind of true for them, and the person who doesn't like it says the same thing about the 2B, the fourth statement. Okay, 2B, the best flavor of ice cream is chocolate. Now, when we think about the psychological statements about people's belief, while we see Jones and Smith don't disagree about something, nonetheless, the truth of Smith's believing that the earth is flat and Jones believing the earth is not flat is relative. In a certain sense, it's relative to Smith and Jones. It's talking about one's relative Smith, the other one's relative to Jones. But in a certain sense, relativity there is a little bit different that we'll talk. But notice when we look at these statements, all of a sudden we think the truth in some cases is objective. That's the way the kind of the world is. In some cases, the truth is relative. And now the question comes up with regard to the moral statements. Is it more like the factual statements, that they're objective, or more like the taste or the aesthetic statements? So that's a question we want to think about a little bit in getting a better understanding of what truth is.